your research methods and methodologies. You take decisions based on how you're going to analyze your data, how you're going to write up your thesis, with, of course, decisions concerning your field work and what methods you're going to use to gather your data. So as a researcher, we do take a number of important decisions. And so my questions to you here today is, what underpins or informs your decisions? How do you take such important decisions in your research? So that's the first question. And the second question, I would like you to consider the elements that constitute your unique identity as a researcher. What builds your identity as a researcher? This is an important question, I think, and if you haven't come across this before, I think it's very important to start thinking about your identity as a researcher. هويتك أنت كباحث. What makes your identity as a researcher? In other words, what do people know you for as a researcher? You are now in your process, your research. Soon you're going to submit your work, you're going to pass your viva, inshallah, and then you'll get the title, whether master's or PhD. What do you want people to know you for at the end? When you go back to your workplace, when you go back, to your, back to the society, to your context, your own context, what do you want people to know you for? How do you want also to form this unique identity online when you contribute to the existing knowledge online through social media and other platforms? What do you want people to know you for as a researcher? So everyone, please, if you could kindly take notes on those two questions. We're going to come back to these questions at the end of the webinar, and then hopefully you'll be able to answer those questions. Let me begin with quick introduction with my interest in research. As Dr. Anoud, thanks Anoud for introducing me at the beginning, and she said that as a researcher and a language instructor, or language lecturer at Sultan Qaboos University, my interest in research actually started right after my master's back in 2000. During teaching, I started looking into my own teaching, questioning my own beliefs in teaching. And that is a very essential stage, actually. Everyone should begin to question his or her beliefs in teaching. We question our practices. We question our teaching. We reflect on our practices, which is a very important aspect of you as a researcher. And that will contribute, as we're going to see later, this will contribute to forming your researcher identity. So I started looking into my teaching, asking myself, is this the best way to do it? Is this how teaching should be? How are my students feeling about the classroom? How do they feel about the lectures? How do they feel about their marks? And I started gathering data and looking into the different aspects. So that's how I started. Later on, this interest has developed into actually collecting data, not only asking questions, but actually starting collecting data from the classrooms by talking also to other colleagues and faculty members at the university. This is a very important thing to do, guys. And then I started looking into problems, into some kind of maybe we'll call them problems, but maybe challenges. That's a better term to use. There have been a lot of challenges. For example, students, as I at that time used to think that they are losing, they're lacking actually interest, they're lacking motivation. And then when I started learning about autonomy, نظرية الاستقلالية في التعلم, learn autonomy, and I thought that the students really lack autonomy, they lack interest, their motivation is not really up to the level that I expect. And so I started generating some kind of assumptions about my students. But then through research and investigation and critical thinking, I realized that actually not all of my assumptions were really accurate. And that's the beauty of research, that you start asking questions, you engage yourself in inquiry about what you are doing, about your students, about your context. If you are in business, you start asking questions about the firm you are working for, what you are doing, your customers, your products, and so on, your sales, and so on. So that's how I started. I started developing interest in research through questions. And questions is a very important tool, a very powerful thinking tool, guys. I would like to emphasize this this evening in this webinar. Everybody should engage in critical thinking because it will lead you to questions, and questions will always lead you to improvement, of course. As I said, inquiry is important, not only at the professional level, but I also found that this, engaging in this kind of capacity, I think of habits, is really benefits at the personal level as well. It just makes your life easier. It makes your life more interesting, more meaningful when you start questioning things. And that is what I call the seeds of a researcher. These are the seeds that you sow in order to become really a good researcher, a researcher who always asks questions, a researcher who is interested, a researcher who has inquiry, who utilizes inquiry-based teaching, inquiry-based business, inquiry-based thinking. So this is very important to start asking questions. Let me now move on to my experience at School of Education at University of Sheffield between 2012. That's when I started my PhD, 2015. And this is very much lends itself to the big concepts. When I joined the University of Sheffield and the School of Education in particular, there were some students who started their programs prior to me, and they were like a senior, 1 year senior to me. And then I joined, I started, hearing them talking about ontology, epistemology, constructivism, positivism, and so on. And I was going like, what are these concepts? Because to be honest, before joining the PhD program, we were fully busy with teaching and marking students' essays and presentations and so on. We didn't have really time to read about these issues. But when I joined the School of Education, and at the department, I heard that my friends are talking about such a thing. I said, hey guys, can I join the discussions? And I really, really learned a lot. And I consider them as my heroes. They were really my heroes, the real heroes that I feel really indebted in their efforts in also bringing that kind of discussions. It's a very, very important discussion, guys. Think about your department, think about the people around you at the department, engage with people, and do really talk about research. Try to share your research ideas, do validate your understanding. This is a very, very important. My own experience, I know that some of the feedback we got from the previous sessions in this series of webinars, people really enjoyed the presenters sharing their personal experiences. And here, guys, this is my experience with the School of Education. We were like a group of 7 or 10 students. I remember my best heroes were from Libya, one guy from Gambia in Africa. We had some students also from Saudi Arabia. We had my best friend, of course, Omani, Dr. Salam. I don't know if he's with us today. I wish that he is also with us. We also had students from China, students from Malaysia, and Korean students. We really had a good collection of students at the department, and we started this kind of discussions on big concepts in research. They are big concepts, and I'm gonna say why they are really big concepts. But that's how it all started, guys. Big concepts in research, they are really big, they are highly abstract, and the way to learn them and to digest their meaning, to get your head around those difficult concepts is through 3 things. Your own reading. I would like to emphasize reading. So number 1, do reading. And then number 2, do critical reading. And then number 3, repeat 1 and 2. okay? So reading, critical reading, and then the third step is to repeat 1 and 2, meaning to continue reading and to continue critical reading. It's very important. So you read about those difficult concepts, but many people say, well, Dr. Hashim, we read, but the more we read, the more we get confused. Yes, that all happens to us as well. I mean, everybody passes through this experience. You've got to continue reading. Select the easy materials. There are some short articles which explains ontology and epistemology, constructivism, all these big concepts in research. Do read, please. The second thing, after you have read, validate your understanding with your colleagues. So you have colleagues there who could help you with validating your the understanding. The third thing is your supervisor, of course. Try to get to your supervisor, try to ask him or her, try to get their own understanding of these concepts. So these are the three sources, I would say. Your own reading, critical reading, your colleagues at the department, and of course your supervisor. And there are of course other people at the university. Don't only keep to your supervisor. Your supervisors might be busy, or they might not always be available when you need them. So make sure you also establish this kind of good relationship with other members of the faculty in your college, at your department at least. So that would really be helpful. So that's quickly my experience with School of Education at Sheffield. When I finished my PhD, I joined, of course, I went back to the university, and I was quite lucky at that time because the research committee did not have a head. So that was a vacancy available when I came. And so I immediately applied, and I was interviewed, and I was accepted. And so I was the head of the research committee at the Language Center at the university. At that time, it was known as the Language Center. That's why we have the LC Research Committee. That's Language Center Research Committee. Now, the Language Center being converted into Center for Preparatory Studies, CPS. Now, previously known as LC, Language Center Research Committee. And I started working at the committee. We had a group of dedicated members in 2015 to 2017. We were able to outline research policy for the center, for the university. We identified who is interested in research, and I started to attract people to the committee. That was really important. So my advice to you guys: when you finish your research, when you finish your degree, you go back to your university, you go back to your college, you go back to your business, your companies, whatever, ministry, whatever department. Do please, find out what is it you can do to put your knowledge and skills, in practice. Try to contribute in one way or another. Try to search for these opportunities here and there. Try to make remarkable contributions. And then if you, for example, you go back and then there were no vacancies, try yourself to create one. And this is very important. Write it down, please, everybody. You try to create, keep nagging, keep suggesting, proposing committees like this, or for example, think tank, a group of experts who will be taking care of research. You have spent 4 or 5 years working on your projects, on your PhD. You have gathered quite useful skills, knowledge, solid knowledge in your field. Let this, be available to people through committees, through participation, through conferences, through paper publications, and so on. And so, as I said, if there isn't a vacancy for research, or there isn't a body, a unit which cares for research in your department, try to create one yourself. Try to start, take the initiative. Don't forget that this is a very important things to do. And here we go. I'm sharing my experience about the Language Center Research Committee when I finished my PhD. Later on, I started developing research, not only just interest in general research, but started looking at the methodology. And this really attracted my attention every time I read a research paper. I don't tend to pay attention that much to the research findings. Of course, that's important, but also I developed this real interest in linking the findings to the methodology. And later on, I really found that this was really useful, and it develops my interest even a greater deal to think more about methodologies, different methods available, and of course, this itself lends itself very well to what we're talking about, the big concept. So we talk about methodology, we talk about methods, we talk about research paradigms, philosophical frameworks. These are big concepts, and it's really not easy to talk about. And I'm really taking risk here talking about such issues, because so far I don't know if anybody has even presented a webinar on this, but it's really risky. But I accepted that challenge. I said, okay, let me contribute what I know. And I really know little, and what I'm contributing to you today, what I'm sharing with you is my own experience. And I'm sure that in this webinar this evening, we have people with PhDs, of course, who are also with a better knowledge and understanding of these concepts. But of course, the purpose that we all learn from one another. So that's how I started. That's how I developed. Later on, I had started also to have some contact with PhD and master students at the university. And I said, well, let me do something to help those guys, because they really suffer. I received emails and replies, posts to my research tweets from people who are doing research, not only in Oman, but also from outside, but mainly for the university, with master students at the university, and some PhD as well, who had questions and they couldn't get their heads around some concepts in research, and sometimes they couldn't find answers through their own reading, and so they really needed help. So I said, okay, let me help those guys. And so I started the consultation sessions, الجلسات الأكاديمية لطلبة الدراسات العليا. I started these consultation sessions for postgraduate students. I put it on Moodle, on Twitter, and I got some quite good number of positive feedbacks that I really encouraged me to start this. And so I started seeing students twice a week. I started like Monday and Wednesday. When I don't have afternoon classes, I started meeting students and receiving students in my office. We had a big meeting room there at the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, and we started talking about their own research projects. Some of them came with challenges choosing their topics. Others have problems with deciding on the best methods and methodology for their research. Others had problems with validating their research methods. Some people are already in the field and they are gathering their data, and then they also needed information about how they could do their data collection and so on. And of course, I also had students who also came to see me for their analysis and so on. So that's how it started, and I started developing interest in research methodology when I first started receiving all those students, and I started thinking about the kind of problems they are having. Let's now move on. So that was a general introduction about me and how it all started. Big concepts in research. I'm really a big fan of research methodologies, and I had the chance to examine 3 master's students at the College of Education at the Sultan Qaboos University. And I would like to share my own experience with this as well. And it's all to do with my interest and my focus perhaps on research questions and methodology, because I believe that the research findings will only make sense through sound methodology. I would need to check your methodology first and see what you have done. And I would just how you have dealt with these big concepts in research. And if you have the difference, you can differentiate between method and methodology. If you have your voice in research clearly outlined, and I'm looking at your research design, research approaches, the methods, the steps you have followed, and the decisions you have taken in your research. That is was really very important when I look at any master's thesis. And so I started, you know, looking at these big concepts in research. And I also asking myself, why is it that really many people find it really hard to get their heads around these concepts? Because that happened to me actually. And let's see how we could talk about these in a simple way, in simple terms. No one could deny the fact that these are really highly abstract terms. They're not easy, guys, and it takes some time to digest these concepts, and it takes sometimes also to get your head around them. But let me, in this slide and the one that follows, to simplify this. But that's the purpose of today's webinar, is to simplify these concepts and see how we could explain them in simple terms. Generally speaking, we have two big concepts: ontology and epistemology, and these are the two concepts that that underpins your decisions, that inform your decisions. It's important that PhD students in particular understand what ontology and epistemology are and how they could integrate them into their research design, as we're going to see later. So what is ontology? Of course, there are different definitions for ontology, but just to put it simply, is that ontology, think about it in terms of the world around you. What exists in the world? And what is it that that constitutes the meanings in the world around us? So your ontology would be your sense of the world around you. What really exists in the world? So that's ontology. And how do we know about what exists in the world? That is the second concept. So the difference here between ontology and epistemology is that ontology has to do with the world around us, and epistemology is to do with knowledge. In other words, it's to do with how do we know about ontology. So this epistemology is to do with learning, with knowledge. How do we form knowledge? How do we learn about the world around us? And ontology is about what exists in the world around us. And what comes under ontology and epistemology are different views and different philosophies. People and the psychologists and philosophers have come up with different viewpoints. Of course, they have different viewpoints. We also have our own different viewpoints about the world and what exists around us. And so let me give an example of an ontology. So an ontology could be something like, for example, peace. Peace is an ontological concept. How do people view peace? It's something about equality. Another example, equality. What is equality? What is it? Is it something in the available to everybody? Is it something that we can feel? Is it available in our practices and so on? So how do people feel about it? People have different, you know, of course, viewpoints. They have different perceptions, and so that's ontology. Two quick examples on ontology. Now, epistemology is how do we know about peace and how do we learn about equality? For example, equality is important in a society as a social concept. It's a very important now concept in the society, of course. So how do we know about for example, the ontological value such as equality is what epistemology is. And I hope I'm not confusing you here, because they are, as I said, these are highly abstract concepts, but one really needs to take them seriously and pay attention to the difference, because they overlap, they intertwine, as we're going to see later. But just try to take it as simple as this. Ontology is what exists in the world. Epistemology is how do we know about what exists in the world, right? Let me now move on to different philosophical viewpoints. As I said, people first started thinking about ontology and epistemology and started to form different theories and different paradigms. And a paradigm is a way of thinking. So those are some philosophical viewpoints which I think are important in research. Let's begin with positivism, for example. As you can see here, we have positivism, and then we also have objectivism came out. We have also realism. We have critical realism that appeared after some criticism being directed to realism as a theory. We also have constructivism, we have social constructivism, we have interpretivism, and pragmatism. I was just talking to one of the members of the researcher group we have, and he, a couple of days, he just finished his PhD, and we asked him about his methodology, and he said that he applied the pragmatism in his research. And this will help us understand how we could relate all these big concepts to our research. So let's look at these philosophical viewpoints or research paradigms. Positivism and objectivism, these are very simply, these are research paradigms or philosophical viewpoints which regard the world as something already exists in isolation from people. So in other words, whatever you see in the world around you has nothing to do with what people think, has nothing to do with the researcher, for example, opinions, the researchers' ideas, and researchers' conceptions, and so on. So, for example, a group of researchers, group of philosophers and group of thinkers, they form positivism and objectivism because they're working within the natural sciences. And so when you, for example, do like a kind of research on natural resource, natural sciences, not social sciences, we have to differentiate between social sciences and natural sciences. Natural sciences that include, for example, physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, and so on. On the other hand, the social sciences would include education, law, business, for example, and so on. That's why we have the colleges of science colleges, or social sciences, and or humanities on one hand, and natural sciences like engineering, science, and so on. So positivism and objectivism will lend themselves very well, neatly, to the natural sciences, because there scientists will be applying tests, and they are interested in scores, and they are interested in examining the world as it is. The researcher has nothing to do with this. There's no interaction with the people. There's no interaction with what you as a person think. The world exists in isolation. That's how to put it simply. So that's what the positivism and the objectivism advocate. Then we have also the realism, and then they developed the critical realism that came after realism, and so on, because there were some rejections to this kind of these views. When you read the literature on this philosophical, you see that you start reading about one school of thinking or school of thought or paradigm, and then then you also read about the attacks that came to those school of thoughts. And because of that criticism, then there is philosophers later on started to came up with the different or opposing paradigms. So positivism and objectivism, as I explained them, they reject any kind of interaction between the individuals and what exists in the world, for example. Critical realism rejected this and said, no, we cannot think of the world this way, because people will always have interaction with the world around them. And so the meanings that we gather, that we have about the world around us, does not exist in isolation from people. We have our own understanding. Another group of people have their own understanding. And so reality can be, yes, can be different, can be varied, but it always relates to the world. Okay. So this is what those concepts mean. Then we have the constructivism on the other hand. Constructivism would be in an opposite direction to positivism and objectivism. Constructivism and then social constructivism came when you read the work of Piaget and Vygotsky, for example. They started talking about social constructivism. Anyway, constructivism or constructionism, there's a slight difference, but they overlap. I don't want to go into those issues now. Constructivism, think about it as the other camp. If you think of those concepts as camp 1 and camp 2, المعسكر الأول والمعسكر الثاني. I think this is a very good analogy to think about it. And there's like a kind of, like a war or a conflict between the two. So here we have the positivism and objectivism camp. Here we have constructivism and interpretivism camp. This is, I think, one way to make things easy and to simplify the idea. Think about them as two camps. One camp comes where the positivist thinkers, objectivist thinkers, and then the other camp, which is the opposing camp, where the constructivist and interpretivist come. And they have opposing point of views and opposing philosophical viewpoints. I myself subscribe to constructivism, social constructivism, and interpretivism, and that's what actually form my research identity, as we're going to see later. Two other big concepts, of course, in research are methodology and methods. And many people confuse the methodology and method. When I attend conferences in different occasions, I attend workshops or presentations, and I see people talking about their methodology. And so the word methodology appears on the top of the screen. But what comes after that is people have started talking about their data collection methods. I said, hey, where is the methodology? Well, that's not a methodology. We need to understand the difference between methodology and method. Methodology is an umbrella concept, if you like. It's an overall concept that outlines your position, or positionality. Methodology governs your selection of methods. So we talk about methodology as what informs your method selection. And methods, of course, will be your data collection, specific tools for data collection. And so many people, in many occasions, people confuse the two. And that's why I had this slide here, just to help people think about the methodology and methods are not the same. Methodology comes first, followed by method. So this is an umbrella term. Methods comes right under methodology, and methodology actually informs your methods or informs your selection of methods in your research. Now, why are these concepts really big? Why do I call them big concepts in research? Basically for two reasons. First of all, they are cumbersome. Let's agree that they are really hard to explain. They are hard to understand, to digest. They are highly abstract, as I said, and they often intertwine or overlap. As I explained in the previous slide, for example, here, you notice that I gave you examples, and I started explaining the difference here and giving you the analogy of camp 1 and camp 2, and there's opposing views. But of course, many of you will still have questions about these concepts. That's why it's really risky, to sort of a webinar talking to people about those big concepts, and then assuming at the end that people will get it like that. No, of course. So let's be realistic. And I myself have to admit that it took me really long time to get my head around this. And so that's why they are really big in research. So the first reason is that they are important. Yes, they are hard, they are difficult, but they are important. And then don't lose hope. Through reading, as I said, through discussing them with your supervisor, discussing them with your colleagues at the department, things will become easy. And I'm sharing my experience here. I was able to get my head around this actually through these 3 steps that I told you about. First of all, reading, and further reading. And not only general reading, but selective reading and critical reading. Don't forget. Are you writing down things? Are you taking notes? Please do so. Yeah. So reading, critical reading, selective reading. Second is try to discuss these with your supervisor or other faculty members at the department. Go ahead and talk to people, ask people, send emails, post them on Facebook, post them on Twitter, and get people as explanation. Because some people, I really found that they really had a good way of explaining things. It's they are very skillful, and they simplify things better than the books, for example. So this is the one reason why they are important, why they are big. The other reason why they are essential and big is that because they are important for your research cohesion or coherence and integration. It's very important to establish your own understanding of this in your thesis, and then show people how you have selected your methods. It's very important to be able to outline your methodology and outline your method in a way that it links very neatly to your philosophical viewpoints, as we're going to see in the onion model later on. So it's important that you establish this. And by the way, guys, I noticed that master students don't touch upon these issues, these big concepts. Maybe their supervisors don't want them to do so, or they themselves don't know about these big concepts in research for different reasons. I don't know. I have, as I said, examined 3 master's theses at the College of Education at Sultan Qaboos University as an examiner, external examiner, and none of them have touched upon these concepts. Maybe some people think that, well, it's a master's, it doesn't really matter. They don't really, need to talk about these big issues or philosophical stuff. I have my own objections to this. Sorry, guys. I think at least 1 page in your master's thesis needs to be on these big concepts. As master students, try to prepare yourself to this. After masters, many of you will be doing their PhD. And if you started learning and reading about this at the master's level, this will just pave the way to your PhD, and which will make it much, much easier later on when you do your PhD. So it's very important. And my advice is that master students should also start thinking about their philosophical viewpoints. They should also include, as I said, even a page or a page and a half outlining their positionality, outlining their paradigm, the different research paradigms, how, what is it that they stand on in terms of research philosophy. Where do these methods that they are using, where do they come from? How do they, what's about their thinking in terms of ontology and epistemology? Okay, so don't worry about these big concepts. Don't let them, take you away, run away from philosophies. At the end of the day, remember, what does PhD means? It's a doctor of philosophy. So the word philosophy actually is in your title, and then you need to get your head around these concepts. Yes, they are big. They are cumbersome, as I said. They are abstract concepts, but they are learnable. I have learned them, to some extent. and many other people will also learn them, and I'm sure you will also learn them. So because they are important, as we're going to see later in the onion model. Here we go. This is the onion model, which will explain and help us understand how these big concepts fit together. So let's get to the model itself. And this comes from Sanders, 2007. As you can see, the references there. When I started looking at this, I found it, yes, quite useful. But I thought that I would, twinkle a little bit and play a little bit with this diagram, because I couldn't see constructivism here, and I couldn't see the relationship between these layers. So as you can see here, the onion has been chosen for this model because onion has layers, as you can see, different layers, tabaqat. And this is maybe what's special about the onion and not tomatoes or potatoes. We have different layers, as we can see. Because so we're running out of time, okay, some about 15 minutes left. We're looking at this, I thought, let me do a little bit of modification to it. And I came up with this version. So notice that the difference between the two. I've added these words here and the arrows, the double-sided arrows here, just to show the relationship. Let's explain this onion and see how it links to our own research. This is quite helpful because it shows you the outer layer of your research design, the second layer, the third, the fourth, and the core of the onion, which is data collection and data analysis. So it all begins here at the outer layer. And I've added a larger layer here for ontology and epistemology. I think we need to have those two concepts in the onion model. Ontology and epistemology, these are the two concepts that shape your thinking and then inform the decisions you're going to make when you start designing your research. So let's look at the ontology and epistemology. So at the outer stage, at the outset of your research, the outer layer, طبقة الخارجية, we have ontology and epistemology. Ontology, as I said, how do you view the world around you? Epistemology, again, as I said, it's how do we learn about the world around us. So epistemology is about knowledge and how we get knowledge. Ontology, on the other side, as I explained, is about our perception of the world around us. What exists in the world? What concepts exist? What values do exist? For example, equality, peace, and some other concepts. At the second layer, it's the first layer on the model, but it's the second layer for me. We have the philosophies here. So we have the positivism, realism, interpretivism, idealism, constructivism, and so on. As you can see, that comes at the outset. So the first thing the researcher will need to think about is about the philosophies. The second layer is the approach. Are you gonna adopt deductive approach or inductive approach? What's the difference? Deductive is theory driven and inductive is data driven. So here you have data and you're analyzing your data in order to reach a theory. Here you already have a theory and you use the theory in order to understand the phenomena you are investigating. So this is inductive, this is deductive. One way to explain this is also to look at it from another perspective. One is top down, the other one is bottom up, if you like. So which one is the top down, do you think? You can put them in the notes if you in the chat if you like. I always like to interact with my participants, but maybe because of the time. Deductive is the top down, and the inductive is the bottom up. Here you're working with data in order to generate a theory. Here is you already have a theory and you are seeking generalizations. One way to look at this is to think about it from another perspective. Here is theory testing, and here is theory generation. Let me repeat this. Inductive approach is about theory generation. Here you have data, it's data driven, and through the data, you are aiming at developing a theory. So here is theory generation, and here is theory testing. So you already have a theory here, you are testing it. Here you have a data, and through the data, you develop a theory. So this is the third layer. As you can see, you choose your approaches. Is it deductive, inductive, and there's a third one, abductive, but we don't want to confuse people. Well, just the two most obvious, or the two mostly used approaches here, deductive or inductive. So you decide whether to go for deductive or inductive. Are you gonna you have, for example, hypothesis which you want to test, or is it you're gonna dive into the field and then develop your own theories later on? So that means that you're gonna decide whether to take the deductive or the inductive approaches. Now, the next layer is the strategies. Are you gonna do a survey, conduct an experiment? You're gonna take the case design, case study, action research, grounded theory, ethnography, or archival research? It depends on your research questions, of course. And then we're gonna talk about these choices. After that comes the choices. Are you gonna use one single method? Are you gonna use two different methods? Are you gonna use, for example, quantitative, qualitative, or mixed method approach? Is it mono method, mixed method, or multi methods? Some people would like to do, for example, interview. They're gonna also have content analysis, and they have a questionnaire, for example. So that's multi or multi methods, and mono method will be the employment of one single method. For example, I'm gonna only use questionnaires, or I'm gonna give a test, or I'm gonna interview people. Next layer is you need to think about your time. Are you gonna take this group of participants, your sample? Are you gonna study them over a long period of time, or you're gonna take a sample of each level, for example? So that's a cross-sectional or longitudinal. This is another important decision also to make when it comes to research design. Okay, if you are, for example, taking a group of students and you study them from, for example, first secondary to second secondary to third secondary, and then even when they get to university, the same group of students, that's an example of longitudinal kind of design. Cross-sectional is that when you are interested in finding out about a group of students at different levels. And so you don't have that much time, and then you're gonna take students from Muscat, for example, another group of students from North Al-Batana, and a group of students from Masandam or Salalah. So that's a cross-sectional, and it applies in different ways, depending on your research questions. Now we come to the last point, the last layer, if you like, which is the core of the onion. And this is the data collection and the data analysis. Now, let me explain this blue double-sided arrow here. I have added this because I want people to think about this diagram and all these steps as an integrated, not as one step leading to, separate stages. No, they are not separate, because let me explain quickly in 1 minute. I explain it. My ontological and epistemological positions will inform my philosophies. My philosophies will inform my approaches here. And then my approaches will inform the kind of strategy I adopt. And then this will inform my choices. I'm gonna do what, mono method or mixed method or multi method. And this will also inform my time horizons here. Am I gonna choose cross-sectional or longitudinal? And finally, this will also inform my decisions when I start thinking about the data collection and the data analysis. It all depends on what kind of decisions, what kind of philosophies you have decided. And this is a very important thing. Let's very quickly now take some examples, how we can link this to the big concepts. Examples. Let's look at this example, for example. Measuring the impact of flipped teaching on grade 12 students' achievement. Think about the topic, measuring. So notice that we are talking about measuring something here. All right, so you are interested in finding out how this teaching method would affect students at grade 12, how it would affect their achievement, for example. All right, now this is one example. Now the second example is teachers' beliefs about online teaching during COVID-19 pandemic. So here I'm interested in teacher beliefs. Now think about those two methods and see if you can relate them to this. If you can relate them to this. Now, remember, in the first example, the researcher is interested in measuring the effect of something. So there's an intervention, and the purpose is to measure the impact of that intervention. The second example, we have exploration of belief. And so when it comes to your ontology and epistemology, what are you going to choose? What philosophies you are going to choose? You need to have a clear standpoint here, viewpoint, which will then inform the other decisions you would make. Until we get to the core of the onion, where it comes when it can have to do with data collection and data analysis. So I hope this is clear, and how the ideas relate one to another. So these are quick examples, and this should make you think about your own title, your own research questions, your own research design, and how you could inform your research design, because this is going to be an important point to keep in mind when it comes to defending your research. Quickly on the researcher identity, this is an important point. Your established philosophical viewpoint is your positionality, and that's what actually forms your researcher identity. It forms your هويتك انت كباحث. It's very important also to talk about this because and it lends itself to what we talked about earlier. It's about your unique identity as a researcher, and it's about what people know you for as a researcher. So at the end of your degree, when you get the title, you're a doctor now. Think about your positionality. Think about your identity as a researcher. What's special about you as a researcher? What's unique? What distinguishes you from other researchers? And what do you want people to know you for as a researcher? Right? This is important, and it all has to do with this. So think about this. Are you gonna adopt, for example, the constructivism or objectivism? Are you a constructivist thinker, or are you a positivist thinker? You see, I keep coming back to this because it's really very, very important, because it informs our decisions and at the same time informs our identity as researchers. So I want each one of you guys now to start thinking about your researcher identity. Write it down, put it on the wall, show it to others. That's what makes me a researcher. Okay, let me carry on. So the هوية الباحث is an important issue, and we want to really start thinking about it. Now, the last point, the last slide here, it's about our warm-up questions. Let's revisit. Let's go back to our research warm-up questions and think about them now. I hope that you will be able to have some kind of ideas to answer these. Now, what underpins or informs your researcher decisions? What do you think informs your decisions when it comes to selecting your research methods? What informs your decisions when it comes to selecting your data collection methods? What informs your decision when it comes to data analysis, and so on? What do you think underpins these decisions? This is, I think, a very important question to think about, and the answer should be clear to everybody. The second question is, what constitutes your unique identity as a researcher? As I said, what makes you a researcher? What do you want people to know you for? For example, in just one, I know we have reached the time, end of the time, but in just less than a minute, for example, I will share my own experience here. I have started taking this clear position in research, and I want people to know me as qualitative researcher, for example. And now I've started posting tweets on qualitative research, because I believe, from what I have seen, that qualitative research, البحث النوعي, somehow overlooked or underestimated in educational research. Everybody wants to do a questionnaire. And I have a problem actually with questionnaires. I'm not saying questionnaires are, a questionnaire is a bad research method. It all depends on the research questions. But I have seen, through the students who come to see me for the consultation, I have seen many research topics lend themselves to the qualitative. They are qualitative in nature, but people still want to do an experiment in the classroom, and they still want to do correlational kind of research, experimental research, and they don't think of getting closer to the people and to getting the data from people. It's very important to get closer to your participants, and then to see what kind of methods that you really want to use here. So I think of myself, I view myself, I present myself as well to people as qualitative researcher. What about you? In other words, what do you want people to know you for? When you finish your degree, it's very important to have this clear in your mind. Everybody should be able to draw or outline a distinguished identity. That's your unique identity as a researcher. So ما هي هويتك أنت كباحث؟ كيف يتعرف الناس إليك أنت كباحث؟ So that's the last point I want to finish with. And I'm more than happy now to receive your comments and questions. I apologize. I think I spoke for more than, did I, Anu, did I exceed the time? Sorry about that.
It's fine. أتوقع عادي يعني مع البقية. Okay. ببدأ سالم المقبالي comment. I got across some big scholars who believe on starting the research with methodology and then the philosophical stances. What do you think, Doctor? So they start with the methodology and then they go into the philosophy. So they start from the core of the onion.
I don't think it works that way. You will then be asked this following question: what informs your selection of your methods? And how are you going to answer? Your answers, your selection of methods will have to be based on solid grounds, and those solid grounds are informed by your philosophical position. Your selection at the outer layers of the onion, as we have seen. So as an examiner, for example, your work, I will need to see the decisions that you have taken and what underpins those decisions. It's very important to get this clear, guys. You cannot start the other way around. I don't know. People might have different understanding of this, but at least this is how I understand it, and this is how I defended my thesis. This is how I always review research that are presented to me for review and for validation. We cannot start with the deciding on the method if I have no idea what my positionality is. That's my response.
All right. Another question: can we say that methodology and research design are the same?
As I said, these do intertwine, and they overlap sometimes. But you need to think about. Let me share this again. You need to think about the. You need to think about the relationship. Here, for example, if we go back to the onion. Okay, this one. See, the decisions need to be taken based on your positionality, what philosophical viewpoints you are holding about the world. It's your ontology and epistemology. Then moving on, taking the decisions about whether you want to do deductive or inductive, and then decide on the strategies, and then decide on the the approach. Are you going to do quantitative, qualitative, mixed method, mono method, multi method, and then you're going to talk about this, take a decisions about time zones. Is it cross-sectional or longitudinal, and so on. As you can see, it's a system. It's an interrelated system, and I would explain this relationship as being organic. It's not sequential. It's not linear, but interrelated, intertwined, and organic kind of relationship. And I have put this arrows here just to make it clear to people that these, these layers do intertwine and integrate with one another.
Okay. Munir is asking here, where does the Islamic view of knowledge meet with these big concepts?
Wow, I know, Dr. Munir. It's not easy is to answer, because when it comes to Islamic views, people might have different interpretations. But I personally, when it comes to ontology and epistemology, I believe that we give meanings to objects and not objects themselves retain their own meanings, because we tend to form our own Islamic views and Islamic identities based on what we have received from divine sources, and then later on people have started applying reason and knowledge, and that's why we have qiyas, and we also have al-ijtihad, and so on, all these methods that the scholars, Islamic Muslim scholars, have applied in order to understand the phenomena around them. And so when we talk about things that come across a Muslim's life regarding different phenomena, different aspects of life, what do? We have the Quran, of course, and then we have the traditions of the Prophet ﷺ, and then we move on to the qiyas and also al-ijtihad and so on, which means that people apply constructivism actually. So they apply different methods, and not all methods will work. But for example, if we take idealism, and also, for example, if we go to pragmatism, for example, look at this pragmatism. It's about what works. Pragmatism is about what works, regardless to the ethics. And that's what takes me away from this, actually, to constructivism. Idealism also, I don't think that would match our beliefs. But we talk about constructivism or interpretivism, which will, I think, very much fits our beliefs, be it Islamic or social or you name it. But that's not an easy question, by the way.
All right. I have a question here saying, where does axiology go in this diagram? I'm not sure what does this mean.
I didn't axiology. Yes, it's not here in the model, and I did not put it in here because that would take us a little bit away from the the simplicity. Regardless, the focus of this webinar is that we want to simplify things. We don't want people to run away from research because of this. We want to bring people to research in order to explain things in an easy way. And you notice that maybe this is a good time now to talk about this issue, when these are not everything we have on ontology and epistemology. What you see here in the outer layer here is not everything on research paradigms. If I go now to this, for example, it's not everything we have here. You see, this is not an exclusive list. We have so many other big concepts and research. The reason I selected these, because these are the ones that that people usually refer to, and these are the most current, recurrent issues. Doxology, of course, it's part of the paradigms, a part of the philosophical. People might also want to adopt that kind of thinking, but it fits here. If the question is about where it fits, it fits at the earlier. Sorry, it fits at the earlier outer level or of the model. It's outside here. Okay. Anything with ism is a philosophy. Okay. These are the isms, if you like, ism concepts.
All right, shukran, Doctor. Rahma wants to talk to you. Rahma, the mic is.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Hashel. Thank you very much, Anoud, and thank you very much for a very informative webinar. It's not really, I don't know if it is a question or more of a comment in relation to the Islamic theology and how we, where it is in research. I believe, why isn't it possible that we subject whatever ism there and use it, to make use of it, learn the lessons from all of these philosophies or theories and subject them to our context? So what I mean by this is, instead of us trying to tailor our society or the findings in the light of these theories, we do the opposite. Because I thought that was very useful. I use social constructionism, and I was using that to discuss discourse, news discourse. And I believe, and of course, I integrated framing analysis, discourse analysis. Yet, what I thought was very useful is that we have to acknowledge the cultural specifics. What are the aspects that could influence a discourse? And again, we cannot really separate a text or a discourse from power or religion or a society or any other culture aspects. So I don't know if you agree with this, Dr. Hashel, or any of the colleagues or researchers, but wouldn't it be legitimate for us that we subject these philosophies to our context without trying to fit or appropriate ourselves into these molds?
A very good question or comments, to be honest, and quite rich and heavy in meaning. You are taking us deep inside into the philosophy, research philosophy, and I agree, yes. We need to integrate these issues into our understanding of the phenomena around us. We cannot separate ourselves from this, and then any kind of meaning that we arrive at is a result of our interaction with the environment around us, with the world around us, which is which it's social constructivist kind of thinking, because whatever you learn is derived from your understanding of the world around you. Yes, I agree, yes. But if you are talking about we critique, for example, I don't know if you have used the word critique or criticize these things. Yes, critical thinking is important, and that's how developments have taken place. If you read a little bit of philosophy, you notice that the developments and the improvements came as a result of the people, early scholars, critiquing the previous thinking and previous school of thoughts. Without critiquing, without asking questions, we won't be able to improve. And as a researcher, you need to question, you need to critique, and you need to think in an unusual way. If we all start thinking in the same way, in other words, we become like copies of each other, we're not going to improve. We need to be radical thinkers, guys. Don't worry about asking difficult questions. And my piece of advice, if there's anything I would like really to pass on to our researchers this evening, is to be special and to be courageous and start asking the difficult questions. Yes, do ask questions, and do start working within a model which you think will reach you to different findings, different results. Otherwise, problems or challenges will remain as they are. We want thinkers who could make and cause and bring about changes.
Okay, I got 2 more questions. Is triangulation a must in research? Someone saying, I have some work with only one method.
This is a very good question. Many people got obsessed with this idea of triangulation. Guys, if you are, I don't know if the researcher is a social scientist, or social researcher, or a natural researcher. In natural research, people would like to think about triangulation because they want to get data from different sources, because the belief is that when I get sources from more than one source, data from more than one source, then that gives my research even better strength, or I don't know, more validity and reliability, a bigger validity. I don't think of social research. As I said, as I explained, my هويتي كباحث, my researcher identity. I'm constructivist researcher, and I've already decided that I'm qualitative researcher or mixed method researcher. Qualitative research. In qualitative research, by the way, triangulation is not a must. And I know that this might be shocking to many people. If we have any supervisors here, any faculty members, they can, they feel free to disagree. But I think triangulation does not belong to the qualitative research. It lends itself more to quantitative research, but not qualitative research. All right, let me explain a little bit in less than a minute. In social research, we are interested in exploring social phenomena, right? And you take a specific group of people, and this case, usually we design our research around case studies or ethnographies or phenomenology. And so if you have a case study, you are interested in that particular case. You are exploring that particular case. I don't care about what happens elsewhere in a different context. I'm not interested in that. I'm not comparing. This is not a comparative research. It's not, experimental. It's not relational. So the purpose is not to compare and contrast. I'm exploring this particular, and so I don't need to compare my results to results from different contexts. And so I apply methods that will help me answer my research questions. One method or 2 methods, but when you, for example, get you analyze documents and at the same time conduct interviews, this is not called triangulation. I don't know, many people might get this wrong. The triangulation is not about using more than one method.
Oh.
It's not. For example, if I'm, for example, interested in finding out about my students' autonomy, that's my research, which I conducted for PhD. Now, autonomy is about students taking charge of their own learning, taking control of their own learning. And I want to understand autonomy in my students. I'm going to interview them. I'm going to conduct in-depth group interviews, or I call them group discussions. I have my own reservations against the term interview, by the way, because it comes from business, has nothing to do with education. That's something else. We can have another webinar on that. But what I'm saying is that I decide to use, I'm constructivist research as well. I'm interpretivist, constructivist thinker, and I'm going to apply the case study or ethnography. and I take a group of students and study them in depth. And so here I'm going to use more than one method. Now, when I decide to use interviews plus document analysis or ask students to keep diaries, reflective diaries, how many methods have I used now? 3. Reflective diaries, document analysis, and group discussions. No interview, yeah? Don't use interview. Group discussions. Now, these 3, the purpose is not to compare or cross-match the findings that I get from these different, so I hope people get this clear. I'm not comparing the information or the data I'm getting from those 3 different sources or 3 different methods. They integrate, they consolidate each other. The purpose is not to compare. And so this is not called triangulation.
Okay.
And I'm happy that someone raised this point just to explain this. Triangulation has something else. Triangulation is to do with quantitative research, not qualitative.
Okay, there are 2 things. Last question is someone is asking about Arabic. كتاب باللغة العربية يشرح الإطار الفلسفي. إذا عندك دكتور
كتاب باللغة العربية؟
باللغة العربية أيوة.
أي موجود يعني طبعا الأطر الفلسفية موجودة طبعا باللغة العربية، لكن أنا مشكلتي لما أجي أخذ هذه الكتب المشكلة هي ترجمة المصطلحات مثل ما خبرتم، يعني مصطلحات مثل المبحوثين، التثليث بياخذنا في العقيدة وغيره، النظرية المجدرة ولا المؤسسة ولا غيره مثل ما ذكرت في البداية، يعني في إشكالية في المصطلحات، يعني احنا يعني هي الأساس. خلينا نعترف ان هذه اساسا العلم طبعا له اصوله اللغه وكذا يعني والتاريخ والتراث الاسلامي، لكن معظم الكتب الموجوده حاليا هي ترجمات، يا انها ترجمه حرفيه لمراجع اجنبيه او انها مؤلفه لكن المؤلفين يستخدموا المصطلحات الحرفيه، الترجمه حرفيه، وهذا عامل اشكاليه بالفعل يعني. فموجود المراجع طبعا واللي يريدها ممكن يتواصل الخاص، لكن انا تعمدت ان يكون سلايدز باللغه الانجليزيه علشان my target audience here mostly I think they are students who are in English speaking countries. We have I think participants from the UK mostly, from the States I'm not sure, but I'm sure there's at least one person from Malaysia. She promised to join us. I don't know, and so on. So when I want to explain things in English, you find it easy, I guess, to take notes in English, relate what you hear this evening to your own writing, to your own resources. So I think, and don't forget, I mean, you're gonna publish your work in English. You're gonna do the Viva voice in English.
Okay. Okay. شكرا. في أسئلة سأله أتوقع أحمد المطاعني، بس إذا ممكن دكتور تسوي لنا في سلايد أو شيء the way to contact you، لأن في كم أحد يسأل way to contact you، لأن ما عندنا وقت نسأل أسئلة، لأن أتوقع أسئلة أحمد المطاعني جدا جدا ممتازة، بس ما أعرف إذا أتوقع أنه خلاص أخذنا تقريبا ساعة ونص، فإذا ممكن أستاذ أحمد المطاعني تتواصل مع الدكتور أكيد طبعا ما بيبخل عليك.
أنا بس أختي عنود، بس لو سمحت أنا راح أعمل شيرينج الحين مع هذه وأروح إلى آخر سلايد، وبعدين ممكن يكون حط، ممكن قاعدين تشوفوا هذا
أيوة.
أنا بحط. طيب هذا الإيميل. I'll be more than happy to receive any questions on this email and also on Twitter account.
في أحد يسأل إيش دكتور أحمد أستاذ أحمد المطاعني يرسل لي تقريبا privately، that's why إنه ما تشوفوه أنتم. بمشي على الأسئلة بشكل عام بس to kill the curiosity. All right, okay, what is it? How do we justify the number of participants? How do we select them? And what are the criteria? Because most of these studies, they don't mention, or justify why they select a certain number. There are a couple of things. Where is it? I guess he was commenting on Islamic view on these concepts, balance between not challenging the social norms and asking radical questions, as you mentioned, in a conservative context like Oman. So بسبب الوقت أعتذر بقصوى، ما عندنا وقت. اللي أي حد يحتاج الدكتور هاشل، عندكم الإيميل وهذا تويتر أكاونت أتوقع.
نعم.
أتوقع ما بيبخل دكتور هاشل. أخيراً شكراً دكتور على وقتك، شكراً على الإيضاحات اللي وضحتها اليوم في المحاضرة. شكراً جميعاً لحضوركم. إن شاء الله يلنا لقاءات أخرى بعد رمضان. كل عام وأنتم بخير، وتقبل الله منا ومنكم صالح الأعمال. شكراً جزيلاً. خلاص الحين كل حد يقدر يليف. نتفق على خير إن شاء الله.
شكرا جزيلا everybody. Thanks.
Not enough time for discussion. المشكلة الوقت. الحين ساعة ونص، صعب. شكراً.